Good evening. It's 7 o'clock, July 6th, 2020. Happy birthday, Dalai Lama. Many, 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 many more. We need you. Before I start, I want to thank, this is the Tibet Center, by the way, Kunchap Tarduling, New York City and New Jersey. And this is our twice weekly presentation of Buddhist topics. Specifically tonight, the secular ethics and leading into the Lam Rim. I want to thank everyone who has contributed to our fundraising drive, is keeping us going. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's really, we run the place on a very strict budget, so we get very good use out of your money. If you want to have us remember anyone who's passed away in the last week or so, or even before that, write their names in the text section. So we'll start. We have a lot to do. By the force of the blessings of the non-fallacious three precious gems, and of the truth of our pure selfless wishes, may the precious Buddhist teachings flourish and spread to the expanse of all areas throughout the length and breadth of the West. For all the people living here, together with their near ones, who have engaged in the teachings and have faith and respect for them, may all conditions adverse to their practice of the pure Dharma be dispelled, and an excellent collection of favorable conditions increase like the waxing moon. And especially for those who work on methods to accomplish the flourishing and spreading of the victorious one's teachings, which are the source of benefit and happiness, may they never be oppressed by masses of interference and adverse conditions, and may this spontaneously happen just as we have hoped and wished. The Heart Sutra. Thus have I heard once the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of the Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a big gathering of great monks and great bodhisattvas. At that time the Blessed One entered the samadhi which examines the dharmas called profound illumination, and at the same time noble Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the profound practice of transcendent knowledge, saw the five skandhas and their natural emptiness. Then through the inspiration of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to Avalokiteshvara, how should those noble ones learn who wish to follow the profound practice of transcendent knowledge? And Avalokiteshvara answered, Venerable Shariputra, whoever wishes to follow the profound practice of transcendent knowledge should look at it like this, seeing the five skandhas and their natural emptiness. Form is empty. Emptiness itself is form. Emptiness is not separate from form. Form is not separate from emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discriminating awareness, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Thus all the dharmas are empty and have no characteristics. They are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, since there is emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discriminating awareness, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no objects of mind, no quality of sight, no quality of hearing, no quality of smelling, no quality of tasting, no quality of sensing, no quality of thought, no quality of mind consciousness. There are no nidanas from ignorance to old age and death, nor their wearing out. There is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no ending of suffering, and no path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, since there is no attainment, the bodhisattvas abide by means of transcendent knowledge, and since there is no obscurity of mind, they have no fear, they transcend falsity and pass beyond the bounds of sorrow. All the Buddhas who dwell in the past, present, and future, by means of transcendent knowledge, fully and clearly awaken to unsurpassed, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of transcendent knowledge, the mantra of deep insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering, should be known as truth, for there is no deception. In transcendent knowledge, the mantra is proclaimed, Tayato Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhisoha. O Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should learn profound transcendent knowledge. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised the bodhisattva, Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, profound, transcendent knowledge should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, that whole gathering in the world with its gods, humans, Ashuras, and Gandharvas, their hearts full of joy, praise the words of the Blessed One. Refuge in Bodhisattva vow, we say it 3 times. With the wish to free all beings, I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment. Enthused by wisdom and compassion, today in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. With the wish to free all beings, I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment. Enthused by wisdom and compassion, today in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. With the wish to free all beings, I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment. Enthused by wisdom and compassion, today in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. So we're continuing with secular ethics, and the sources are the 2 secular ethics books written by His Holiness. One was Ethics for the New Millennium, that was written at the turn of the millennium, about 20 years ago now. And the other one is Beyond Religion, which was written 2012. Came out actually to 13, right after Sandy. And we went through this book twice, I think, before. Anyway, we're continuing with the secular ethics portion. And we're examining, talking about, we ended at the discussion of His Holiness's feelings when he visited Auschwitz, and his conclusion that how could a mind be so calculating and yet divorced from the actual purpose? They were very careful about building the ovens and everything, but he was very taken aback with that. And we want to prevent that. We want to prevent these things forever from ending. And His Holiness's point is you must change internally. And we must cause others to change internally for the good. So when he's talking about human feelings now, he's saying much more effective and important than such a legislation. In other words, ruling out these international conventions against violence, this and that, and yet the trouble still goes on. Much more effective and important than such legislation is our regard for one another's feelings at a simple human level. And now he talks about these. When I speak of basic human feelings, I am not thinking of something fleeting and vague, however. I refer to the capacity we all have to empathize with one another, which in Tibetan we call Shen Dugnyal Wala Misopa. Dugnyal is suffering, Sopa is without patience, something like that. Anyway, he's going to translate it for us. Translated literally, it means the inability to bear the weight of the sight of another's suffering. Given that this is what enables us to enter into and to some extent participate in others' pain, it is one of our most significant characteristics. It is what causes us to start at the sound of a cry for life, to recoil at the sight of harm done to another, to suffer when confronted with another's suffering. And this, he claims, the basic component of our human makeup. And we suppress it, obviously. Some of these horrible things that go on in the world are done by people who suppress this. So he's saying, well, what's the technique? You need mental tools. He's saying, just as a carpenter would not think of mending a chair without tools at hand, so too do we require a basic toolkit to help us in our daily life to live ethically. In the Buddhist tradition, this toolkit is described in terms of three interrelated factors known as heedfulness, mindfulness, and introspective awareness. Heedfulness, mindfulness, and introspective awareness. These three ideas may also be useful in a secular context. Together, they can help us retain our core value in everyday life and guide our day-to-day behavior so that it becomes more in tune with the aim of bringing benefit to self and others. He's saying you are heedful of how you're acting so you don't forget your basic good nature, eventually your basic Buddha nature, and you act out of that context. The first of these three, heedfulness, refers to adopting an overall stance of caution. The Tibetan term bakyo, often translated as heedfulness or conscientiousness, I think Nikki translated as prudence. There was a big argument about this word, not argument, discussion. Prudence, something like that. No, it carries the sense of being careful and attentive, moment by moment. Being careful and attentive. For example, if we are diagnosed as having diabetes, the doctor will advise us to be very careful with our diet. The doctor will warn us that if we fail to adhere to the dietary regime, there may be serious consequences for our health. When patients care about their health, they will follow their advice, the doctor's advice, this advice, and adopt an attitude of caution regarding their diet. Yes, if you're sensible, When they are tempted to eat something they should avoid, this attitude or stance of caution will help them exercise restraint. And we have to do that with regard to our behavior. In one classic Buddhist text, heedfulness is illustrated with a story about a man convicted of a crime who was ordered by the king to carry a bowl of sesame oil full to the brim while a guard walks next to him carrying an unsheathed sword. The convict is warned that if he so much as spills a drop of oil, he will be struck down with the sword. We can imagine how careful and vigilant the convict would be. He would have complete presence of mind and total attentiveness. The story illustrates how closely related heedfulness is to the qualities of mindfulness and awareness described next. Today, there are many secularized techniques for the development of mindfulness. You're going to talk about mindfulness now. And we have, the famous corporate mindfulness. There's talks on mindfulness at Google and all this. So you can look into very many secularized techniques for the development of mindfulness. And these have been shown to be effective in stress reduction and the treatment of depression. As I understand it, mindfulness in this context usually refers to gaining awareness of our own patterns of behavior, basic patterns of behavior, our thoughts and feelings, and learning to let go of these habits, thoughts, and emotions which are unhelpful. This seems to be a very worthwhile endeavor. So it's not just recognizing that there's a sense of, a value system. So, yet, in the context of living ethically on a day-to-day basis, in my view, His Holiness is talking, in my view, the most important meaning of mindfulness is recollection, the classic definition, recollection. In other words, the mindfulness is the ability to gather oneself mentally and thereby recall one's core values and motivation. It's not watching patterns, but what's my base motivation? What's my purpose? So, in Tibetan, the word for mindfulness is drenpa. Also means memory. So it suggests bringing presence of mind into everyday activities. With such recollections, we are less likely to indulge our bad habits and more likely to refrain from harmful deeds. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does. It works. Certain things like simpleton, littering, being wasteful, overindulging oneself, all simple examples of behavior which can be improved through the application of mindfulness. In a very simple level. We're not talking about any religious thing. I should remember the 3 jewels every 10 seconds. We're trying to present something to people who have no religion, not interested in Buddhism. He's taking it down to the bare mechanics. Awareness, the third factor. We had heedfulness, mindfulness, now we have awareness. Shezin in Tibet. It means paying attention to our own behavior. It means honestly key word, observing our behavior as it is going on. Not, in retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. As it's going on. So you're very aware of scenes that you're entering into, discussions, and this, you're constantly on your game. And thereby bringing it under control. Watch our behavior as it's going on and bring it under control. Okay? By being aware of our words and actions, we guard ourselves against doing and saying things we will regret later. Oh, yes. When we are angry, for instance, and if we fail to recognize that our anger is distorting our perception, more about that later, we may say things we don't mean. So having the ability to monitor oneself, having, as it were, a second order of attention, is of great practical use in everyday life, as it gives us greater control over our negative behavior and enables us to remain true to our deeper motives and convictions. We have this motivation that we're setting out to do this and that. We have to be constantly aware of how we behave and if it's going counter to that motivation. Such awareness of our own behavior, our actions, thoughts, and words is not something we can learn overnight. So don't be upset when you stumble and fall the first 2 times you try it. It takes a long time. Rather, it develops gradually, and as we become more aware, we slowly gain mastery. So you have to, before you ever do any of these practices, convince yourself that they're worthwhile. Scope it out. Be logically secure that this is the way you want to go. Otherwise, you won't have the impetus to really do the work of keeping aware of your original motivation. So that's his suggestion. Practicing awareness is not quite the same as listening to your conscience, however. That's a thing we have in the West. In Buddhist ethical training, or theory rather, there is no idea of conscious as a distinct mental faculty. But being conscientious is still very important. It is described in terms of 2 key mental qualities, namely self-respect and consideration of others. So conscientiousness is described in terms of self-respect and consideration of others. Think about what that means. The first of these, self-respect, relates to having a sense of personal integrity. Nothing prideful, just personal integrity. A self-image as a person who upholds certain values. And people who are, going to these demonstrations and seeing all the terrible things going, they're upholding certain values. Yes, yeah. So when we are tempted to indulge in harmful behavior, our self-image acts as a restraint as we think, this is unbecoming of me, the me I want to be. The me you were a few minutes. Never mind. The second mental quality, consideration of others, pertains to having a healthy regard for the other's opinions, especially for their potential disapproval, their potential disapproval. Maybe he wouldn't like this, so you sort of hold back. All right, not in terms of, against injustice. You don't hold back there, but I won't put it this way. They might be offended, things like that. Rinpoche is very good at that. So they know when to introduce a topic, how to talk about it, and it's a skill. So together, these 2 factors give us an added level of caution about doing wrong, which can strengthen our moral compass. So now we're going to talk about dealing with destructive emotions. Get rid of my page marker here. If, as I have suggested, he's going to go through right now, this the emotion section here. It's pure psychology, more or less, from a Buddhist point of view, probably from the Abhidharma. I'm not familiar with the Abhidharma, but that's where they usually put all these things. Anyway, if, as I have suggested, the key to human happiness lies in our own state of mind, so too do the primary obstacles to that happiness. Happiness is in our mind. The obstacles to happiness are in our mind. Without a doubt, the greatest impediments to our individual well-being and our ability to live a spiritually fulfilling life are our own persistent propensities towards destructive or afflictive emotions. Propensities, an idea of momentum towards the old patterns, the old habit. You don't even have to think about it, it just flows right into this behavior, propensity. Such emotions are the real enemies of human happiness and the ultimate source of destructive human behavior. There they are. Again, the mind starts it all. The wars outside, etc., started by minds. Minds convincing other minds that let's do this. We forget this because we're so oriented to the external world. Is it a realistic goal to get rid of these destructive tendencies? Do we human beings actually have the ability to change ourselves from within? Tune in next week. Well, no. The world religions have long recognized that we humans have the capacity to change from within. But in a purely secular context, demonstrating the reality of this capacity can be challenging. A committed materialist, for instance, may argue that we are completely determined by biology, or to use a contemporary phrase, that we are hardwired in certain ways. Determinism, good old-fashioned determinism. Yeah. In such a view, some people are determined by nature to be angry, while others are more inclined to be by kindness, to be kind. Some are genetically disposed to be being optimistic, while others have an innate propensity for depression. There's a lot to be said here. There's a lot of views on this. So, given that many of our characteristic traits do indeed seem to be inherited, and that afflictive emotions like anger, hatred, and jealousy are part of our, quote, nature, it may also be right that there is nothing we can do about them. Very challenging. Well, so we may feel perhaps it really is impossible to change the mental disposition we are born with, and that's it. I'm going to the bar. If there really is nothing we could do about our, quote, emotions, we would truly be slaves to them. However, evidence is gradually emerging from science. He's using the scientific argument now that from these fMRIs of brain behavior, when you think of something, the brain reacts a certain way. We've heard this. But he's using this to convince people who are total materialists. So, however, evidence is gradually emerging from science, especially psychology and neuroscience, to suggest that it is possible to achieve meaningful change in our emotional and behavioral patterns through conscious effort. It seems that the recent discovery of what is called brain plasticity, it's not recent anymore, but 8 years ago it was, may well offer a scientific explanation for the meaningful change. Researchers have observed that the patterns and structures of the brain can and do change over time in response to our thoughts and experiences. In other words, when forced to think a certain way, to bring up a certain thought, to bring up a certain mental attitude, compassion, etc., they see a physical response in the brain, the researchers. And the more they apply this, the more the brain changes. So this is strictly science. This has nothing to do with any belief system. Moreover, scientists are now able to observe the interaction between those parts of the brain associated with higher cognitive activities, such as rational thought in the prefrontal cortex, and those parts known as the limbic system, including the almond-shaped amygdala, which are associated with our most primitive instinctual and emotional reflexes. Whatever happened to the ever-popular medulla oblongata that we learned in biology? I guess it left. Anyway. So the advances in neuroscience have prompted many scientists to give serious attention to the idea that through our own conscious efforts, we may be able to train our emotional instincts by literally altering the physical patterns in our brains. And this has, they've done it with, like, for instance, Matthew Ricard, and they show how that's how they know compassion is more of a doing thing, when the motor centers of his brain lit up when he deeply went into compassion meditation. So there's a lot there. Research in this area is still quite new, but it seems to me that it may potentially provide the committed materialist with grounds for hope as strong as the faith of the religious believer. So that's his point. There are ways of talking to people who have no religion. He wants to prevent violence. He wants beings to be happy, and he'll do anything he can, His Holiness. And it's his birthday today, so It's wonderful that we're studying his words. And you can tell they all come out of his heart. So about emotions now. In the classic Buddhist science of mind, in which I am trained, there is no concept of emotion as a single category that precisely corresponds to the understanding of emotion in contemporary Western psychology. They don't have emotion. I remember Trungpa would say, well, emotions are just supercharged thoughts. That was his definition. And he's from the Kagyu school, and they study Mahamudra, but that was his point, that they don't have an exact correspondence. Indeed, there is no word in Sanskrit or classical Tibetan that exactly translates the word emotion. And now this is very interesting because it shows how sophisticated the psychology is. Instead, all mental states are understood to include both cognitive and feeling dimensions to some degree. Every mental state has both cognitive and feeling dimensions. Everything. Because feeling is one of the 5 omnipresent factors, nanosecond by nanosecond in the brain. Any mental event has those 5 omnipresent factors, which we'll talk about now. And to contain 5 omnipresent mental factors, of which feeling is one. The other 4 are discrimination, volition, attention, and contact. So, and intention is your karma. That's so you have feeling, discrimination, volition, attention, and volition is your karma. Excuse me, attention and contact. They're always there. So even a cognitive mental, this cat's annoying. The cognitive mental process, as simple as counting from 1 to 10, is regarded as having some kind of feeling, or a better word, feeling tone. Very boring, but a feeling tone, unless you mix up the numbers, which naturally is related to context. There are also ways of categorizing our emotional states. For example, in contemporary psychology, the main distinction is often drawn between emotional states which, on the one hand, are pleasurable or joyful and are described as positive, and those which, on the other hand, are unpleasant or painful and are described as negative. Now, that's their category. If it feels good, it's positive, not the Buddhist category, not at all, because they're thinking long term. It could feel good now, but you're building yourself a trap that you're going to fall into. It could be unpleasant now, but you're getting rid of karma, or you're doing something that will improve you. So the criteria of modern psychology, if it's still that, and then I don't know, this was 8 years ago, if it feels good, it's positive, and if it's painful, it's described as negative. So the Buddhist take now, of course, you would expect that they have to include the mind going life after life after life, not just little moments. So, in classical Buddhist psychology, however, the distinction is rather different. Instead, the primary distinction is not between those states that are pleasurable and those that are painful, but between those states that are beneficial and those that are harmful, against the background of many lives and karmic propensities and all that, seeds you plant in your continuum. That's where they make that distinction. That's where they make that call. What's beneficial and what is harmful. Afflictive mental states, known as nyongmong in Tibetan or klesha in Sanskrit, are those which undermine our long-term well-being, while non-afflictive mental states are those which have no such destructive impact. Makes sense? It's important to think that way, because without thinking, we go along with the modern, the ambience of the modern world. Yeah, it feels good, it's good, it's bad. Yeah, you got to take care of yourself. Oh, yes, blah, blah. Yes, to a point. You don't go beating yourself down. You do enjoy yourself, but always with the long-term view, the aerial view of all your lives, past, present, and future. It is important not to confuse those emotions which are afflictive, that is to say, harmful to our long-term well-being, with those that simply don't feel good. Here we go. Of course, sometimes these overlap. Feelings of hatred, for example, are both destructive and unpleasant to experience. But there also can be experiences which may not be pleasant but can nevertheless be beneficial. And the same way there can be feelings that are pleasant, which nevertheless can be destructive. And we could write the book on that. For instance, feelings of sadness, grief, and remorse are certainly not pleasurable, but they need not in themselves be afflictive. Very precise now with the way he's describing things. Sadness, grief, and remorse, they're not pleasant. I know that. We all know that. We've been through this. But they need not in themselves be afflictive. When faced, say, with the death of a loved one, feelings of grief and sorrow may actually be quite constructive in helping us come to terms with our loss and move on with our lives. In other words, these feelings are telling you to face it. It's there. That's it. They're strong. In terms of grief and fear, it should be expressed. It shouldn't be, squelched. You vocalize it. Think about it. You don't do that. Anger you hold back on, but fear and grief should be expressed. Otherwise, they do a lot of damage. In the same way, emotions which may initially seem pleasurable can nevertheless be destructive on a deeper level by undermining our mental peace and stability. One example might be lust, or excessive longing for a particular object. Such longing may in some sense seem pleasurable, but eventually excessive craving will erode our capacity for genuine contentment and undermine our mental equilibrium, and should therefore be considered destructive. So he's talking about your longing for people, for things, etc. That craving, there's a sense of you're in it. It's really the chase, they call it sometimes, going up this craving, I want. First of all, it's not a happy state of mind. We don't realize that because we're focused on the energy of trying to get what we want, that we've just blown up to huge proportions, that this is what we got to have. We got to have it. If you have that component in your mind, you're not content. I don't have and I want. That's what's going on. It's covered by the lust, by the the excessive craving, etc. But eventually that wears out. So eventually excessive craving will erode our capacity for genuine contentment and undermine our mental equilibrium, and should therefore be considered destructive. It's a big point, a big behavioral point. In the context of secular ethics, this distinction between those mental states which undermine well-being, our own and those of others, and those which promote survival and well-being can be very useful, since it is directly relevant to our pursuit of happiness and our ethically sound way of life. In other words, you have to know the ground rules of this. So he's trying to convince the materialists, not talking about karma or anything, but this will destroy your well-being, your contentment, your inner balance, if you want a better word. So I think he uses that later. So, given that people come from many different, I'm trying to not make noisy paper, backgrounds and cultures, which states that are to be considered destructive and which are to be considered beneficial may vary in particular cases. Buddhism always is contextual in its literature and it's the way it looks at situations. It's always contextual. So you can't be dogmatic. This is wrong and that's wrong. Certain things may be wrong in our society, polyandry, but in the Tibetan society it was okay. Polygamy, some societies yes, some societies no. You can't, in some religions, yes and no. So generally speaking, we can define destructive emotion as those states which undermine our well-being by creating inner turmoil. And this you'll know. You have inner turmoil, not so much. Inner turmoil, not just suffering, and thereby undermining self-control and depriving us of mental freedom. That's what happens. You have inner turmoil. You're no longer a master of your mind. You don't have self-control, and that deprives you of mental freedom. Something is running your mind, So that's what he's getting at here, and he's talking to a person that doesn't have to believe in anything. Whether thus it is possible to distinguish between two subcategories, those in emotional states that are destructive in themselves, such as greed, hatred, or malice, and those states such as attachment, anger, or fear, which only become destructive when their intensity is disproportionate to the situation in which they arise. So you have to look for this now. Certain things are in themselves by nature, they would say, greed, hatred, malice. these states, that's always destructive. Anger, attachment, or fear, which only become destructive when their intensity is disproportionate to the situation in which they arise. He's going to explain that. Wait a minute, anger? Anger, he's separating anger and hatred. Nikki uses sometimes wrath for anger and then anger for hatred, whatever, different words. One is an action that can have a good motivation. One, hatred, can never have a good motivation. By nature, it's no good. So, scientists have demonstrated that these basic emotions have clear biological dimensions. When we face an immediate danger, for example, and fear arises, extra blood rushes to our legs. And with increased adrenaline and our hearts beating faster, the emotion of fear literally prepares us to flee. It's legit. In contrast, when anger arises, more blood goes to our arms, preparing us to confront the threat. So the important point to bear in mind is that these feelings are not destructive in themselves. They become destructive only when their intensity is out of proportion to the situation or when they arise in situations that do not call for them. So, we'll go through a few of them carefully. Attachment, for instance, he's saying, when is attachment good? When is it bad? Okay, here you go. We do not usually think of it as destructive attachment, he's saying, the average person. After all, Buddhists don't. It's a bad word to Buddhists. Oh, attachment. We're all attached. We do not usually think of it as destructive. After all, it's the feeling that holds communities together. But when this basic emotion becomes excessive and wants to control its object, it does become destructive. When it's excessive, wants to control, is totally impossible. It becomes destructive. Desire. Desire in itself is not destructive. After all, without desire, the human race would cease to exist altogether. Like attachment, when desire becomes excessive and wants to control its object, it becomes destructive. You getting the point? Anger. At times is not always destructive. Sometimes, strong compassion may give rise to an equally strong sense of outrage. That is anger about an injustice. That is anger about an injustice, which people are confronting now. This is horrible, this is this. Okay, so how do we correct it? He's not saying you don't express yourself publicly, you don't show numbers on the street and all that. He's not saying that. He's telling you to watch your internal mind. However, when anger extends beyond the practical function of energizing and focusing us on an injustice, the practical function of energizing, and he's very tantric here because that's one of the things. When you have these strong emotions, you have focus, you have energy. Where is it going? Most of the energy it brings us is not helpful at all when it extends beyond the practical function. Most of the energy it brings is not helpful at all. Since all of us have probably been on the receiving end of other people's anger, we all have experiences of its unpleasant consequences. However, while anger may sometimes have a constructive element, hatred never does. Boom. So, watch your hatred versus anger. Your legitimate rage versus a sudden, I can't stand that person, they're totally bad, etc. That creeps up if you're not attentive internally. Hatred is always destructive. End of story. By nature, always destructive. Fear. Well, I'm afraid I can't get to this now. Fear, like anger, is not always destructive in every situation. Fear makes us more attentive and guards against danger. It is also a powerful motivational factor, forcing us to be cautious and to take care of our well-being. But when fear is obsessive, it can paralyze us and become a very destructive mental condition. Furthermore, excessive fear gives rise to a persistent state of anxiety, which is harmful to our health. Excessive fear equals persistent state of anxiety, which is harmful to our health. The energy of that fear, as you have it, and don't correct it somehow, sends up this feeling of unease and something's going to happen any minute now, that kind of thing. You can't walk around like that and spiritually evolve. So it has to be corrected. I therefore often distinguish between reasonable fear and unreasonable fear. Here's how you correct it. The first kind is not only legitimate, but actually necessary to our survival. If the mad dog comes running at us, we need to respond to this danger with fear and get the hell out, whatever. This is obvious. In contrast, unreasonable fear occurs when the source of threat is largely our own mental projection. We need to keep that kind of fear in check, for it is totally useless and often destructive. What we need to counter unreasonable fear is a better understanding of the situation at hand. More discernment, more logical assessment of the situation at hand. And if you don't have that habit pattern, you have to develop it. You have to have developed this habit of, what am I afraid of? Getting a handle on it, because it will drive you nuts. No. This dual aspect of emotions, that all of them have destructive and non-destructive sides, can also be seen in other mental states such as doubt, shame, grief, competitiveness, and even our sense of ego itself. He's going to run through those too. Do we have time? Yes, we have time. Doubt is the mental factor that enables us to inquire and seek out understanding. Indeed, I always say that a dose of skepticism is quite healthy, in that it opens our minds to questioning and new knowledge. However, when doubt becomes pathological, it can paralyze us and prevent us from taking any decisive action. Analysis paralysis. The same is true of shame. At the basic level, shame is an important social emotion, which has a constructive function. Nevertheless, when shame becomes extreme, it could lead to low self-regard and negative self-judgment, which are clearly not constructive. Now, with regard to respect to grief and sorrow, in some situations, these emotions are constructive and they have a positive effect. But when it becomes something like a habit of mind, divorced from any realities or realistic cause, rather, it may be destructive. And when it manifests as self-absorbed grief or depression, that's the downside for you. I didn't say that right. So, when it becomes something like a habit of mind, divorced from any realities, any realistic cause, it may be destructive, as when it manifests as self-absorbed grief or as depression. Self-absorbed, and then you start to define yourself as unilaterally a person, monolithically is a better way, that's just always grieving, and you get depressed. Competitiveness too can be constructive, that when our competitive urge motivates us to strive to achieve something better or higher. However, when competitiveness acquires an aspect of wanting to put others down or hold them back so we can out-achieve them, it then becomes destructive. And now, egoism. In egoism, too, we can distinguish between two kinds. A strong sense of self can be constructive, the basis for generating self-confidence, the state of mind that allows us to feel, yes, I can do this. But another form of egoism is evident when, in pursuing our own self-interest, we become totally oblivious to others' welfare and even willing to exploit others to benefit ourselves. This type of egoism is clearly destructive. No question about that. So, when dealing with matters as subtle as human mental processes, it is important not to be too dogmatic. Dogmatic is he doesn't like. He never did. He wrote a book called Beyond Dogma. It is difficult or impossible to determine whether or not a given mental state is destructive without knowing its context. Again, often we can make the determination only by taking into account three factors: the underlying motivation, the specific object of the emotion, and the consequences of the emotion. In shorthand, and then what? Rinpoche's famous three-word teaching, and then what? And so on. In the area of the human mind, therefore, we should always maintain an attitude of open-mindedness, pragmatism, and flexibility. So what are some of the shared features of destructive emotions? One feature that characterizes all destructive emotions is a tendency to distort our perception of reality. Very true. They cause us to narrow our perspective so that we fail to see a given situation in its wider context. For example, when we are feeling an extreme form of attachment, such as intense desire, lust, or greed, often we are projecting a level of attractiveness onto the object of our desire, which far exceeds what is really there. Yes, yes, yes. We become blind even to quite obvious shortcomings, and in our obsessive clinging, we create a kind of insecurity in ourselves, a feeling that we need to obtain the object of our desire and are incomplete without it. I must have it. I'm nothing without you. You're out of your mind. And when you have that mental posture, you're nuts, to put it in an unscientific way. Excessive attachment tends also to involve a desire to control, which can be very suffocating when the object of that desire happens to be another person. Yes, no kidding. Because of this, extreme attachment is by nature quite unstable. One moment we may feel great affection for something or someone, but when, for example, our desire for control is thwarted, this feeling can easily turn to resentment and hatred. And the newspapers are full of this. Hollywood's full of this. And other things too, but a similar loss of perspective characterizes extreme or intense emotions of aversion, such as anger, hatred, contempt, or resentment. That's a nice salad there, huh? When we are gripped by intense anger, for example, the object of our rage will always appear 100% negative, even though in moments of calm we may recognize that the same person or thing has many admirable qualities. The overly strong emotion causes us to lose our capacity for discernment. We cannot see the long and short-term consequences of our actions, and as a result, we are unable to distinguish between right and wrong. This is right out of Aaron Beck. If we have time, I'll quote. His Holiness met Beck, and they spoke, and they were very happy about their own. They agreed on so much of this. We literally, for a moment, become almost mad, incapable of acting in our own best interest. And then, after the event, when the emotion cools, how often we regret what we have done or said in anger. Yes. The emotion families. You can another way of categorizing emotions. I'll do this quickly so maybe we can get to Beck. We can classify a destruction emotion in terms of families, distinguished by the underlying state of mind they involve. For example, the anger family. Emotions such as hatred, enmity, and malice are characterized by an exaggerated repulsion. The attachment families, such as greed, lust, and craving, are characterized by an exaggerated sense of attraction. The other main families of afflictive emotions, envy, pride, and doubt, involve mixtures of excessive attraction on the one hand, such as excessive attachment to a deluded self-image, as in this case of pride, and excessive repulsion on the other, such as the excessive sense of enmity toward a rival in the case of envy. As we have seen, in addition to this element of excessive revulsion or attraction or unhealthy mixtures of the two, all afflictive emotions are further characterized by an unrealistic or deluded perception, whatever, unrealistic or deluded perspective. Not only that we see them as inherently existent, not even at that level yet. The point about all these afflictive mental states is that, in one way or another, they obscure our vision by clouding our capacity for discernment. They make us incapable of rational judgment, and thus, we might say, they steal our minds. So briefly, we'll go to Mr. Beck. Where are you, Beck? On a trip to Sweden, yes, some years ago, this is His Holiness talking, I had a lengthy conversation with Dr. Aaron Beck, one of the founding fathers of cognitive behavior therapy, a major branch of modern psychotherapy, which has been quite effective in treating behavioral problems and depression. When we met, Dr. Beck was in his early 80s. It was very interesting to me how close many of his observations were to the insights of classical Buddhist psychology. For example, he said that in intense anger, almost 90% of the quality of repulsiveness we see in the object of our anger is an exaggeration and a projection. This is in close accord with the understanding found in classical Buddhist texts. The point about all these afflictive mental states is that in one way or the other, they obscure our vision by clouding our capacity for discernment. They make us incapable of rational judgment, and thus we might say they steal our minds. So very good, Dr. Beck. So we'll move to the Lam Rim. And, maybe let's say one quick thing. We have like 2 or 3 minutes. We'll start with volume 1. We're going to do the Lam Rim, but we're not going to do it in the classic way of so much line by line, but topic by topic, so we can bring in modern texts, etc., and, modern opinion. When we do impermanence, so we do like the Wheel of Life, stuff like that. We can bring in other material. So the beauty of the Lam Rim is that here the teaching that I will explain is how fortunate beings are led to Buddhahood by way of the stages of the path to enlightenment, one that contain the key points of all the conqueror's scriptures. It's a digest of all the Buddhist teachings, are the pathways forged by 2 great trailblazers, Nagarjuna and Asanga. Nagarjuna for the wisdom portion, Asanga for the method portion. And 3 are the systems for supreme beings progressing to the state of omniscience and fully comprise all the stages of 3 types of person. So he's going to go through it by showing the first part of it. He'll be showing the greatness of the teaching's author in order to establish that it is of noble origin, showing the greatness of the teaching in order to engender respect for the instructions, how to listen to and explain the teachings, and how to lead students. This is a manual of practice. It's not something you learn to memorize and parrot back. This is instructions, and if you look at it very, very carefully, there's a lot of meaning, even things that you might gloss over. Over the years, you might find more and more meaning, and it is a preparation for Tantra. The only way to become a Buddha in this era is through the Tantric path. You cannot enter the Tantric path without proper preparation. This is it. So, leave it as it may. So, we will say the 3 jewels for all these people. Yes, I know that actor, Cordero, died. Herb Tenzer, Charlie Daniels, who else? Yang Fang Su, etc. Oh, Yang Fang Su didn't say. What did she? Jane, you have the paper noises are loud and harsh. Well, I have no other way. I don't have papyrus handy, so. Who else? Nick Cordero. Okay. So with all of them, may they be born in a completely pure realm. Paper rolling is very harsh. Not one way I can do to get around that. If I move farther away, you won't hear my voice. So I don't know how to correct that. Should I use an electronic tablet? Yes. All right. I prostrate to the omniscient one. Thus the Buddha, Bhagavat, Tathagata, Arahat, Samyak Sang Buddha, the learned and virtuous one, the Sugata, the knower of the world, the charioteer and tamer of beings, the unsurpassable one, the teacher of devas and humans is the Buddha Bhagavat. The Tathagata is in accord with all merit. He does not waste the roots of virtue. He is completely ornamented with all patience. He is the basis of the treasures of merit. He is adorned with the minor marks. He blossoms with the flowers of the major marks. His activity is timely and appropriate. Seeing him, he is without disharmony. He brings true joy to those who long with faith. His knowledge cannot be overpowered. His strengths cannot be challenged. He is the teacher of all sentient beings. He is the father of bodhisattvas. He is the king of noble ones. He is the guide of those who journey to the city of nirvana. He possesses immeasurable wisdom. He possesses inconceivable confidence. His speech is completely pure. His melody is pleasing. One never has enough of seeing him. His form is incomparable. He is not stained by the realm of desire. He is not stained by the realm of form. He is not affected by the formless realm. He is completely liberated from suffering. He is completely and utterly liberated from the skandhas. He is not possessed with dhatus. His ayatanas are controlled. He has completely cut the knots. He is completely liberated from extreme torment. He is liberated from craving. He has crossed over the river. He is perfected in all the wisdoms. He abides in the wisdom of the Buddha Bhagavats who arise in the past, present, and future. He does not abide in nirvana. He abides in the ultimate perfection. He dwells on the bhumi where he sees all sentient beings. All these are the perfect virtues of the greatness of the Buddha Bhagavat. The holy Dharma is good at the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. Its meaning is excellent. Its words are excellent. It is uncorrupted. It is completely perfect and completely pure. It completely purifies. The Bhagavad teaches the Dharma well. It brings complete vision. It is free from sickness. It is always timely. It directs one further. Seeing it fulfills one's purpose. It brings discriminating insight for the wise. The Dharma, which is taught by the Bhagavad, is revealed properly in the Vinaya. It is renunciation. It causes one to arrive at perfect enlightenment. It is without contradiction. It is pithy. It is trustworthy, and puts an end to the journey. As for the Sangha of the great Yanar, they enter completely. They enter insightfully. They enter straightforwardly. They enter harmoniously. They are worthy of veneration with joined palms. They are worthy of receiving prostration. They are a field of glorious merit. They are completely capable of receiving all gifts. They are an object of generosity. They are a great object of complete generosity. The protector who possesses great kindness, the omniscient teacher, the basis of oceans of merit and virtue, I prostrate to the Tathagata. Pure, the cause of freedom from passion. Virtuous, liberating from the lower realms. This alone is the supreme ultimate truth. I prostrate to the Dharma, which is peace. Having been liberated, they show the path to liberation. They are fully dedicated to the disciplines. They are a holy field of merit and possess virtue. I prostrate to the Sangha. I prostrate to the Buddha, the leader. I prostrate to the Dharma, the protector. I prostrate to the Sangha, the community. I prostrate respectfully and always to these three. The Buddha's virtues are inconceivable. The Dharma's virtues are inconceivable. The Sangha's virtues are inconceivable. Having faith in these inconceivables, therefore the fruitions are inconceivable. May they be born in a completely pure realm. A lot of sadness these days. Long life for Chabje Chungla Rinpoche, and I hope he said some manis for His Holiness's long life. Chungla Rinpoche, I heard yesterday from him email. He's okay, he's there, and he's staying there as long as His Holiness tells him to stay there. He says that for everyone not to worry about him, don't worry about anything. That's exact words in big block letters there. So, Om Svasti, fully permeated with countless sun rays of love and joy, wearing a black top knot adorned with heaps of coral, O Lord, granting all wishes for longevity, bestow upon the glorious three secrets the festivity of immortality. To the Lord of speech, victorious Tsongkhapa Nawang Losam, possessor of the teachings and realizations comprising the countless rays of doctrine, Shedrup Tempe, great lamp skilled in illuminating the space-like minds of blessed beings, Dronme, we make supplications. Enriched with the treasures of both Sutra and Tantra, ruling over the world of four tenets, by means of the golden wheel of two wisdoms, may you remain firmly as a peerless scholar. Clad in the saffron robes of conscientiousness, saturated with the essence of pure morality, sublime foundation of higher birth and definite goodness, may you remain firmly as a second Upali whose ethics are supreme. Skilled in emitting 100,000 cool rays of loving kindness to the miserable mother sentient beings, tortured by the scorching heat of the vast variety of sufferings, may you remain firmly moon-like and all-embracing. Like Asanga in teaching the systems of Sutra and Tantra, like Shemendra in spreading garlands of poetry, like Dignaga in destroying all holders of perverted views, may you remain firmly for hundreds of eons as the glory of the doctrine and of all migrators. By the sublime blessings of the truth of the triple gem, and by the force of the infallibility of dependent arising, may the fruit of our prayers be spontaneously and effortlessly fulfilled. 8 verses for training the mind. With the determination to accomplish the highest welfare of all sentient beings, who surpass even a wish-granting jewel, I will learn to hold them supremely dear. Whenever I associate with others, I will learn to think of myself as the lowest amongst all, and respectfully hold others to be supreme from the very depths of my heart. In all actions, I will learn to search into my mind, and as soon as a disturbing emotion arises, endangering myself and others, I will firmly face and avert it. I will learn to cherish ill-natured beings, and those oppressed by strong misdeeds and sufferings, as if I had found the precious treasure difficult to find. When others out of jealousy treat me badly, with abuse, slander, and so on, I will learn to take all loss and offer the victory to them. When the one whom I have benefited with great hope unreasonably hurts me very badly, I will learn to view that person as an excellent spiritual guide. In short, I will learn to offer to everyone without exception all help and happiness directly and indirectly, and respectfully take upon myself all harm and suffering of my mothers. I will learn to keep all these practices undefiled by the stains of the 8 worldly concerns, and by understanding all phenomena as like illusions, be released from the bondage of attachment. So thank you for your attention, and thank you those who contributed during the fundraising. Thank you so much. Much, much appreciated, and we will put it to good use. So the next class is Wednesday night, the 8th, at 7 o'clock. Everyone take care and be safe.